Welcome to the Gruber Morning Show. I'm Pete Gruber. This is our Artificial Future podcast that we do every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. And this is where we discuss the latest developments in artificial intelligence, the latest trends, and new technologies that may have emerged. And it's happening rapidly, as you may have noticed. The image behind me took a few tries with AI. Think this is Grok that finally ended up doing the best job. What I asked for was give me a bunch of kids on cell phones while all kinds of hell is breaking loose around them. And it didn't disappoint. The school is back in session here in Phoenix. And I take the same way to work every morning as I've been doing for 40 years now. And the kids are usually waiting at the bus stops this time of year until next spring when school's out. And there could be many as a half a dozen or a dozen or so waiting at the school bus. Um, so what I find is that it's these kids are different than the ones that I grew up with. When we were waiting for a school bus, which was rare, by the way, I was inner city and we usually had to walk to school, but a few times we would get school buses. Um, there was a lot of interplay, a lot of interaction. We would talk to each other. We would fight with each other. We would throw rocks. We would interact. We learned social skills. Every time I drive past any collection of kids waiting for a school bus, they're all on their cell phones. They're completely immersed, oblivious to what's going on around them. And, kids would even, if they saw a cool car, point to the car, tell their buddies, hey, check out this Corvette coming down the road or whatever. All of that seems to have stopped. So I found an interesting article by an author named Ricky Schlott, who wrote the book, The Canceling of the American Mind. And in an article here, she says the headline is My Anxious Generation, the Unforeseen Toll of a Digital Childhood. In this article, she draws from personal experiences, being a Gen Xer, to argue that a digital childhood is a childhood squandered. To grow up online, she says, is to be an experimental guinea pig, modified with a digital appendage. She says, for those of us raised with iPads in our grubby toddler grasp and iPhones in our middle school backpacks, a childhood without these devices is unimaginable. This summer, we took my 13-year-old granddaughter to Austria. I had a speaking engagement there at a Tesla takeover event in Flachau, Austria. We thought, what a wonderful opportunity to take my granddaughter, which is the same thing that my aunt did when she took me through Austria when I was a kid. The memories were just a lifelong. And what I found was that the last day she was there with us for about 2.5 weeks, her cell phone went dead. It froze and it would no longer do its thing. And I looked at her for a day and a half or so, and she was going through serious withdrawals. It was a traumatic experience. She had difficulty relating to the world without that cell phone.
I feel that.
Do you?
Yeah.
She was forced to deal with the reality that the rest of us are in. So the author says a tiny 6-inch screen redefined what it means to grow up, hit milestones, and pass time. So much so that this generation's upbringing is entirely alien even to that of our parents. Well, an algorithmic feed takes over much of their youth. Digital trances replace many of the foundational real-life experiences that countless generations have grown up with before the 21st century.
What generation is Gen X? What's the time frame? Do we know that? I can look that up.
Yeah, please do that. She says, as a member of Generation Z, I know this firsthand, though I thankfully predated the iPad toddler era, but she got her first iPhone at age 10. I was on Instagram, she says, the next year or so, and soon after that made my way to Tumblr and Snapchat. It was far too early, she says. This wasn't because I had neglectful parents, quite the opposite. My parents, she says, were more invested in my well being than virtually any family that I grew up with. But faced with unrelenting pleading and the prospect that their shy child would be the only one left out of the multi line calls after school and the group chats making weekend plans, they relented. Let her have the phone. Virtually all my peers' parents had already folded. Although she didn't fully understand it at the time, the fleeting free moments of my youth were constantly being preyed upon by invisible forces. In the early days of iPhones and social media, most parents didn't understand the bargain that they were making. The tiny screens were a portal into the fast-changing digital world, rife with anxiety-inducing social comparisons, unrealistic beauty standards, and new forms of predation and cyberbullying. The bully that I remember from grammar school, and I still remember his name, as most people would if it was a traumatic event, Dallas Simon. He was a couple years older than we were because back in the day, if you didn't do well academically, you didn't pass, and you took that grade over. And Dallas actually took those grades over twice. So he was sizably bigger than the rest of us, and he wasn't at all adverse to shaking us down for our lunch money. Well, today's bullying and cyberbullying is a bit different. So the parents who they say, or she says, they didn't realize the bargain that they were making. They didn't see the consequences coming. Youth anxiety and depression are reaching record highs. And it's not just as the naysayers argue, the kids that are comfortable discussing mental health, self-harm, hospitalization, and suicide attempts are soaring. She says, I'm fortunate to have made it out of that minefield unscathed. But one feature of the online world got me, the algorithm, which drains us of our most precious and finite resource, time. Though I did not fully understand it, the fleeting free moments of my youth were constantly being preyed upon by these invisible forces. What do you guys think so far? Anybody relate over there in social media?
How do I word this? I feel like this is kind of typical boomerish, you know? I feel like
Okay, I'm gonna put you on screen.
I feel like I hear this all the time from boomers.
Mm-hmm.
You know that kids are on their cell phones too much and blah blah blah. And I think I think we're just going through a phase how we communicate with the world and with individuals a little bit differently. You know, I mean, my niece, you know, grew up on iPads and you know, iPhones, and I mean, she's a lot braver than I was at her age. I mean, she can walk up to a kid and be like, "Hey, what are you doing? You want to go play?" You know, even though she's not on her cell phone, she still has the confidence to go up to somebody randomly and talk. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you know, back in my day, it was stranger danger. She's a little bit more outgoing and willing to take that first step.
I think she's more sociable.
I think she is. Yeah. You know, she posts more stuff on, you know, on TikTok and on Instagram and stuff, and where I would be a little bit more shy of posting out, you know, what am I putting out in the world? What am I viewing out there? You know,
Yeah.
She seems to be more open about it, you know, and kind of dives into stuff a little bit more, you know, and then reels it back after she's experienced some negativity or some positivity.
Mm-hmm. We got a question up here. Facebook, James Jensen has joined us. Thank you. He says, blogger talking about how the digitalization of our culture is dehumanizing people. Weak-minded people trolling like buttons.
Good point.
You also have to take in consideration. Sorry, I have a 6-year-old brother, and so he literally had an iPad, like born in its hands.
Yeah.
iPad kid.
Yeah, we had a spare iPad that we just converted to a children's iPad. But he's very intelligent, like crazy smart. Because he has access to all of this information. He has access to a bunch of different types of like learning apps and TV shows and like YouTube channels that are geared towards kids that show them how things work, like machines. But I remember back when I was a kid, my sister was only 8 years younger than I was, and we didn't really have that kind of stuff. We didn't have access to that. But my sister would always be like, how is bricks made? How is this made? How is that made? Blah, blah, blah. And I could only use what knowledge I had to tell her what it was. But now my brother, he's got an iPad, and he can literally look it up and see how things are made and fall down this giant rabbit hole of how bricks are made or how, I don't know, engines are made, because he loves cars. So I feel like he would end up being an engineer.
So there is an upside, what we're saying, to this intense focus with these digital devices then. A concern that I have is lack of physical activity. When I was a kid, you got bored at home, you went outside, you rode your bike to your friend's house, you went hiking, you went in the woods, you went and played, you climbed trees, you were physically active.
I think
Yeah.
I think at this point it's just unlimited on how long kids are on electronic devices. So when I was a kid and like we played video games, we only had about an hour. After the hour, we had to go out, read books, or go outside, go hang out with friends, and da-da-da. My brother, 6-year-old brother, that's his limit as well. He can play on his iPad for about an hour, or he can watch TV for an hour. It's not one and, it's one or.
So you had parental guidance and you had curfews, and they provided a balance in their lives. Getting back to my 13-year-old granddaughter, she lives on that cell phone 24/7 basically, except for a little bit of sleep thrown in. And she tried out for basketball. And, she would have been the most successful one on the team because she's fairly tall and, hefty. But her hand-eye coordination, her physical capability just wasn't there. And the only guess I have is the amount of time she spends not physically active every single day. We don't know, and I'm going to give you some more from this article. I think that it'll be a discovery process for humanity as to what impact these types of changes have. What will this future generation now be like in their twilight years? Will they have health problems because they weren't physically active during their formative years, building muscle tissue and, all of that?
Yep.
The author says, ever since I got an iPhone, I was awash in dopamine. Be it from massive streaks on Candy Crush, an Instagram like from the popular girl at school, or a Snapchat notification from a crush. And let's not forget, there's Facebook likes and Twitter likes. Even the richest man in the world seems to have a social media addiction. I have no idea how Elon spends that much time, on Twitter running companies. I can't do that. So she says the result was a subtle but constant gravitational pull toward my phone. Always in the back of my mind was a concern that something could be going on online that I didn't know about. With maturity came a sense that something was wrong with my relationship with technology. So she says, I silenced my phone so that the pings wouldn't distract me. But the vibration made it even easier to stay plugged in and peek surreptitiously at my screen under the classroom desk or dinner table. So I turned the vibrations off. But then I found myself checking my phone more than ever, always unsure whether something had popped up on my screen since the last pickup. Through my tween and teen years, there was little meaningful conversation about tech addiction, even though its symptoms were metastasizing much of the world. Almost all of my peers have similar stories of their failed attempts to break their habits. I have yet to hear a success story, she says. My generation can agree on very little. We've grown up in an ultra polarization, and many of us live our own ideological echo chambers. Still, if there's one thing we agree on, is that there's something wrong with growing up online. Now, like Cass says, maybe moderation is the key.
Well, let me give you an opinion here, because this is a Gen X person, right? So
right.
imagine,
Gen Z, actually, she says.
Well, the Gen Z is growing up with it now, but this person that's writing the report is a Gen Xer.
Okay.
And so all that they knew during their childhood was playing outside and having friends and doing that physical activity that you were talking about. So it would be the same thing as going to that person from that was born in the 70s or late 60s, and stripping out the ability to play outside for them, right? Because that's all they have. That's all they ever knew. That's the equivalent of what's happening to these kids now. If you try and take all of their electronics away from them, I'm not saying, moderation is bad. That's a good thing. But if you take it away completely, that would be like taking away playing outside for those kids in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. And there's this whole conversation about the child feeling left out because they don't have what their friends have. Because not every parent's going to do moderation or even limitation.
Or be aware that that is something that might be necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. She says, in fact, I never once met someone my age who disagreed with my contention that a predominantly virtual childhood is a childhood squandered. We all wish we had grown up differently, and we all still struggle, even as we enter adulthood, to modify our relationship with technology. There are often times when I'm sitting there in the evening and saying, why did I just spend 45 minutes watching these crazy TikTok videos?
Mm-hmm.
What else could I have done with my life that would have been a bit
Some
more
rabbit
beneficial
holes.
or meaningful? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't think we know yet what the impact of that will be. She continues, she says, this gives me hope that we can mobilize to inspire change and ensure that history doesn't repeat itself with each successive generation, who will surely grow up with more technological access than the previous one. She makes a good point there.
Pull that up just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the technology we have today is still in its infancy. What's next? I mean, by the time we get to robots and we get to, living with them, humanoid robots, and that interaction.
Yeah.
All right, so she continues, the rest of the world is beginning to hear cries for help. Parents today are far more cognizant of these dangers than just a few years ago. The conversations about banning phones from school is becoming mainstream.
Yeah.
The conversations we're having about banning cell phones in our sales call centers is compelling. We find that productivity drains are unlike anything we've ever seen before. In times past, people would make an occasional personal call or go out and have a cigarette or something. But what we're finding is with cell phones, productivity levels can plummet substantially more than those older distractions. All right, so she talks about an author, Jonathan Haidt's 2024 book, The Anxious Generation, a powerful call to action against the digitization of childhood. And it recently debuted as #1 bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list. She says, we're collectively realizing that for millions of young digital natives around the globe, every second spent in the online world is a second lost in the real world. It's a true zero-sum game. In some parallel reality, she says, where smartphones never existed, I wonder what I would have done with the time I squandered on Vine and YouTube and S&M threads. Now, here's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I missed out on picking up a hobby, playing guitar, art.
Yeah, but here's the counter argument to that. How do you learn how to do art? You can watch a YouTube video, or how do you learn how to play guitar? I've played guitar. I took lessons for 8 years when I was a kid, and today I'll go, if I want to learn how to play a popular song, I'll go watch a YouTube video.
Oh, I hear you clearly. I love piano, never learned to read music, but there's a cell phone app now that actually visually shows you which keys you need to depress while the tune is playing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's a slippery slope. But she says, perhaps I missed out on a hobby or meeting a new dear friend, lifelong friend, or a conversation with my grandparents that I would have remembered for a lifetime. Um, Again, getting back to my 13-year-old granddaughter, Austria in the Alps is one of the most scenic places on earth. We took a detour one time out of Salzburg, getting back to my hometown in Bavaria, and avoided the Autobahn because there was a big Stau, which is German for traffic jam. So we took what our navigation system identified as roads, which turns out to be one-lane mountain roads, perfectly paved, mind you. They do a good job with that over there. But we're going up into these mountainous areas where you see fields of cows with the bells and trees and lakes and everything. And both my wife and I sitting in the front seat were just mesmerized by the scenery.
Mhm.
I look back in my rearview mirror often, and Emmy is back there on her cell phone,
Not even looking at any of it.
completely missing the experience. And again, I pointed out my aunt took me through there 60 years ago or so, and I have vivid memories to this day of going through Bregenz, Austria, right by Lake Constance. I'm not sure that Emmy has those memories because she was on her cell phone at the time that all of these visual images were floating by us. All right. She says that what stories from our youths will never be told because our faces were lit by blue screens when we could have been out in the real world building memories.
Mm-hmm.
We will never know a world unplugged. We were wrong to believe that a plugged-in upbringing was normal. We were convinced that our avatars could be our identities, that online friends are just as valuable as real-life friends, that excitement and adventure could be stimulated or simulated by video games, and that texting someone "I love you" is as meaningful as telling them to their face.
Kabit, I got something here I'm going to pull up
Sure.
that I think illustrates this. I guess I could just pick any one of these. All right, hold on, let me get this image so you can see it.
While he's pulling that up, that was Ricky Schlatt's interpretation of our digital world and the potential ramifications and impact of tuning out, basically. That's what we used to call it during the 60s.
So this is what concerts look like. So when you go to a concert nowadays, pretty much everyone has their phone up recording the concert or taking images or something. Before you go back, before cell phones, everybody was actually there watching and paying attention. We weren't trying to get the best shot of the concert that they're currently at.
Correct. We used to use lighters.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, you were listening, you were engaged, you were mesmerized, you were tapping, you were dancing, you were you weren't trying to record for future posterity. And you know, I mean, honestly, at a rock concert, a cell phone is going to do a real crappy job of recording anything.
Yeah.
People walking in front of you, all of that. Thanks for sharing that. So here's an article headline: Why ChatGPT feels more intelligent than Google search. And the subline is, we will believe in AGI, artificial general intelligence, when it calls us on FaceTime. Won't that be cool? Have a conversation with it. So the Google search bar doesn't feel like artificial intelligence. No one speculates that it might soon become an AGI, an entity that is competitive across many domains to a human being. But do you know many generally intelligent humans who can muster a decent translation into 133 languages? Or a coworker who can perform mathematical operations instantly? Or know a good route between pretty much any two locations on the planet? And proffer a plausible answer to every question you might ask in less than a second? Sure, the answers aren't original, they say, nor are they especially great, but they are increasingly smothered in ads that benefits the search bar's parent company. But why doesn't Google search feel like an artificial intelligence entity, while language models like ChatGPT, and especially the new GPT 4.0, often do? They cite 3 reasons that this is the case. First, Google search clearly derives its answers from human sources, in essence, web pages. And that doesn't count as knowing. Even if the algorithm behind it, finding and delivering relevant results, are fantastically sophisticated. Second, and even if it did know things, intelligence is about spotting patterns in what we know, drawing inferences, and acting on them, not just recalling something. They say we'll come back to the reasoning and taking actions in the world, but there's a final crucial reason why no one considers a search bar to be intelligent. A reason that matters just as much, if not more, to our growing sense of language models being entities, rivals, true AIs, and not just handy tools. There has been no existential angst and widespread job-related placement fears about the Google search bar because it's a portal rather than a personality. No one believes the search bar is a thing providing the answers to your questions. Instead, it is speedily taking you to places to give you answers. But chatbots don't need to break the illusion by bringing you to different sites or citing sources. Nor can they or anyone pinpoint the training data that drove the output they just gave you. The simple singular inference of ChatGPT makes you feel like the thing that you are chatting to actually knows things. And for many, it now feels appropriate to say ChatGPT believes this or that, while no one would say Google search believes something.
You got a couple questions up there, Pete.
YouTube, Mustafa El Gamel, sorry. I don't see a difference about social media versus the old days. It's just a different form, and moderation is key. A few decades ago, they used to complain about how the TV is taking out family time and families aren't interacting with each other, nor the kids playing outside. You make a good point there, Mustafa.
It's true.
I do remember that argument. TV is going to be the death of us all. It's not engaging our mind anymore. It's pure entertainment, and we're not being, it's not stimulating us to think. Nowadays, he says, a family gathering around a TV is considered quality family time, depending on the programming, of course, too.
Right.
Yeah. It's the old generation that's afraid of newer things. You may be right on track there. I'm 73, and maybe these new things feel more threatening to me.
Scared to change.
Scared to change, yep. But I'm puzzled by what will be the outcome of this change in the way that we're interacting. He says the key, the final portion of his comment is, the key is moderation with everything, new and old tech. Good point, Mustafa. Facebook, Ishmael Hosen Sirazi A says, I can't talk about how different countries are using technology, but in my Bangladesh, spending untimely work behind the phone, we should understand that technology is just to make our hard work easier.
That's very true. Does enable much easier work.
Thank you. We've got some good comments coming in. Here's something from Amazon. In a leaked recording, Amazon Cloud Chief tells employees that most developers could stop coding as AI takes over. And this is from the Amazon Web Services. The CEO is Matt Garman, and he shared his thoughts during an AI summit in June. And Garman's comments were kind of advisory nudge rather than a dire warning to software engineers. So what he says is, if you go forward, and he puts a timeline on it, 24 months, so 2 years from now, or some amount of time, it's possible that most developers are not coding anymore. I think you and I are pretty much in tune on that. I've started to use ChatGPT to do some coding advice when I'm working in Visual Fox Pro, which is a dead language. How are you using it typically?
I use it a lot for troubleshooting our websites, especially recently with optimizing the websites and doing a bunch of back-end stuff to clean up the database. We use a MySQL server, and it knows everything that I need to know when I run into errors. It knows how to solve them, troubleshoot them. it's very rare that I have to go find other resources. The one I'm using primarily for code is Claude Sonnet 3.5, I think. But they have a very, very good training data on that code base.
I think you had mentioned also that Claude wasn't as adept in other areas such as ChatGPT.
Claude, it's not as good as doing things on the creative side in terms of writing scripts for YouTube videos, that kind of stuff. But when it comes to coding, it is far superior. Yeah.
And to define coding for a moment, coding is the language that computers talk in. It's their language. So what's more fitting than having machines actually, doing the coding?
Mm-hmm.
So they say it's not necessarily the skill in and of itself. It's the skill in and of itself is like, how do I innovate? How do I go and build something that's interesting for my end user? And that's where he suggests that people that do coding should migrate to. He adds, it just means that each of us has to get more in tune with what our customers need and what the actual end thing is that we're going to try to build, because that's going to be far more useful than coding as the machines take over and start doing that. Okay. The AI people that we have joining us have often heard me complaining about how I wish that certain fast food would just go automated and use AI. And my best example, and this was every Sunday morning when we used to do these podcasts Sunday morning, because that's the only day I go to Starbucks and get a venti coffee. They screw up my order 50% of the time. Just can't get it right all the time. And, as I've said many times, I get it. It's 6:30 in the morning, Sunday morning. Who wants to work, right?
Yep.
They're bored. They're disinterested. They're
Especially
not
for minimum wage.
Yeah, which isn't bad, by the way, these days.
Actually, I think they get away with paying them less than minimum wage because they get tipped, but I don't know.
Oh, okay. That makes it even worse then. So it turns out that in a groundbreaking development, a Starbucks located in South Korea has introduced a fully automated experience with every aspect of the operation managed by robots. And they're all named Rookie, apparently. So in this innovative cafe...
Here's your image.
Yeah, there we go. The customers are greeted by someone named Rookie, a humanoid bot, who seamlessly takes orders, prepares drinks, and handles transactions without the need for human intervention. These robots are all equipped with state-of-the-art AI technology, ensuring precision in every order and a smooth, efficient service process. And this also helps Starbucks, who most of these fast food operations have labor challenges. These robots, remember, work 24/7, never take a vacation, have no sick days, and are, consistently on the job.
We got to catch up to some of these Asian countries that are outdoing us on tech.
Mm-hmm.
Like Japan. Japan's always ahead as well.
And they talk about how this Starbucks experience will transfer into other forms of retail. They say while the concept may seem futuristic, the response has been overwhelmingly positive at this Starbucks, with customers praising the novelty and efficiency of the all-robot operation. I'll tell you, as soon as they get my coffee order right every Sunday morning, I'm sold too.
Yep.
I'm going to be extolling their virtues and
now,
saying...
Would you still tip the robots, Pete?
Robots don't expect tips, Jesse, so I'm going to save my money.
That's a good point.
What would they do? How would they spend it? What would he spend it on? Better oil, maybe, for their moving parts?
This gets into robots' rights and AI sentience.
Oh, my God. A robot UAW, right?
Right.
Oh, that's going to...
Unionized robots?
Yeah, you couldn't call it because United Humanoid Robots, so UHR would be... and we would probably have a Sean Fain equivalent, except he'd be humanoid robot, making wild claims and crazy statements. All right, got something else for you here. We always like it when a new large language model comes out because we can experiment and see how does it differ from, in the case of the image generating, Midjourney to DALL-E, the chat bots, for example, ChatGPT, the variations, Claude. Grok. Well, anyway, Grok came out with a visual capability a couple of weeks ago or so, I think it was. And what we like doing in the instant they release something like this is test the guardrails. See what can we get away with before they realize, oh my God, we need to put up some sort of controls. So the first image I thought we would bring up is Putin Trump.
Okay.
And usually when I try to get realistic images of people in the in the public eye, it does a horrible job. It doesn't look anything like them. This one is amazingly accurate.
Yeah. This was the early days of Grok when it first released its image capability.
Powerful image. And the rubbing noses guys, they're in bed, pink pajamas. There's another one where Putin has a cigarette in his hand. And there's another one now. Let's go to Kamala -1. Again, usually it doesn't render imagery consistent with the look and feel of the person you're trying to get. To me, this looks like Kamala.
Much more accurate than any of the other ones, for sure.
Yeah. So we went a step further. All right, let's go to Kamala-Trump. We're going to put two of them together there. And if you think you're ever going to see this image, probably in another reality somewhere else.
Yeah.
Long pause there.
Speaks for itself. Now I saw a video, a generated video of them this morning where they're holding hands, skipping on a beach.
Really?
Trump and Kamala, yeah.
Yep. Well, we've got one more comment here. Facebook, Ishmael Hosen's Razi A says, in my country, people think we'll lose jobs because of GPT. Well, yes. I'm not sure about losing, like in our company, just under 200 employees. We're not going to be laying people off because of ChatGPT. We're going to be finding other things for them to do, to migrate into. And the types of jobs that we're going to be replacing are the ones that no one wants to do anyway, like 6 o'clock, Sunday morning, serving coffee, right? They would much rather have a job that, lets them sleep in a bit and then do something that exercises their brain. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our podcast this morning. I'm Pete Gruber, and we'll be back next week with another variation of the AI podcast. Thanks for joining us.